You know, you might be quite prolific if people can't even give a straight, definitive answer on how many books you've written. But let's take a look at Stephen King. True sorrow is as rare as true love. Love didn't grow very well in a place where there was only fear, just as plants didn't grow very well in a place where it was always dark. But everyone loves something for nothing, even if it costs everything. No one can tell what goes on in between the person you were and the person you become. You just come out on the other side. If being a kid is just learning how to live, then being a grown-up is about learning how to die. Come on back and we'll see if you remember the simplest thing of all, how it is to be children, secure in belief, and thus afraid of the dark. We make up horrors to help us cope with the real ones. And the most terrifying question of all may be just how much horror the human mind can stand and still maintain a wakeful, staring, unrelenting sanity. Monsters are real. Ghosts are too. They live inside of us and sometimes they win. The muses are ghosts and sometimes they come uninvited. But it ain't the blows we're dealt that matter, but the ones we survive. Time takes it all, whether you want it to or not. And the most important things are the hardest to say. The most important things lie too close to wherever your secret heart is buried, like landmarks to a treasure your enemies would love to steal away. There is no harm in hoping for the best, as long as you're prepared for the worst. Will I tell you that they lived happily ever after? I will not, for no one ever truly does. But there was happiness, and they did live. It always comes down to just two choices: get busy living or get busy dying. Long days and pleasant nights, my would-be constant readers. We are here today to talk why you should read Stephen King. A video I can't believe it's been 5 years I've been doing this channel and I never made. But you've watched this channel, you're a constant watcher, you already know what makes Stephen King great. But say you're new here or you just haven't quite gotten into the King of Horror at this point, I think I'm here today to let you know why I think that you should do it. Now, it is an object of much contention, but he's written approximately 70 novels and about 200 short stories. He sold over 400 million copies and had his books translated into over 50 different languages. He's won the Bram Stoker Award 13 times. He's won the Hugo once, and he's won 5 Locus Awards. And his books have been adapted to movies over 50 times and to the small screen about 30 times. So, but the best accolade that I didn't mention at all, guys, my favorite author of all time. I have been a fan of Stephen King for quite a while, and you can watch many a video on this channel if you want to know that origin story, as it were. So if you're a constant watcher, like I said, you already know all these things because I will always bring it up when I'm talking about things that aren't Stephen King at all. I'll make a comparison to Stephen King because it's the author I've read the most of my life. But if you are still, like I said, you're still kind of on the knife's edge, do I want to read Stephen King or not? I've heard he's just scary stuff, and I'm not into scary books. I think I'm here to tell you that doesn't matter. There's a little Stephen King out there, I think, for everyone. We're just going to kind of talk about several reasons why I think you should read Stephen King. Let's begin with the first one, and obviously the biggest one here, character work. There is no better character writer of all time, in my opinion, than Stephen King. All my years of reading, he writes all these characters in ways that they just feel more real. He's got this huge cast in all these books, and you never, ever have a hard time remembering who is who. He differentiates his characters better than anyone I've ever seen. He gives them little quirks. He gives them little flashback stories. He gives them little character building moments that make you remember, oh yeah, that's the guy that does this. Oh, this is the girl that has the problem with her hands. This is the person whose jaw clicks when they eat. He always gives you tiny little idiosyncrasies about these characters that makes you remember who they are and makes them quite memorable. And he gives them all these little things that make you kind of relate to him because you say, hey, that kind of reminds me of this person I know, or this reminds me of that one thing that I did when I was in 6th grade. He always puts those little things in there that makes you remember his characters. And I can think of right now, you can name a specific book and I'll think about a character and exactly everything. Like Larry Underwood, I can think about everything that Larry did in The Stand. I think about, hey, baby, can you dig your man? You know, there's all these things he adds to his characters that immediately you remember who they are. You remember what made them work. And I think that Larry McMurtry might be the only one I've seen even come close to what Stephen King is able to do in making his characters not only memorable, but endearing, where you love to hate him, you hate to love him, all those things. But you never feel indifferent towards any of them. That's what makes his characters truly, truly special. And I think part of it goes in that is his dialogue. His dialogue, while it can be quite funny, sometimes it can be cruel, and another time it can be poetic. I think he can do all of the above. Sometimes he can do it all in the same sentence, but I think the exchange between his characters just feels so real. It feels so natural. It feels like things you would say, that feels like a conversation that would actually be happening between two people. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like no one would actually say this in real life. He does that so well that these exchanges between the characters always land because they feel so realistic. And I gotta say, the way that he writes kids, if he is writing preteen kids, there is no one in the game that has ever done it better. Ever. I think back to some of the stuff, like I remember when I was younger and I was watching Dawson's Creek. Yes, I did it. We all did it. And I was like, me and my friends, we don't talk to each other like this, but I would read Stephen King and be like, yeah, that's exactly the way that it happens. That is how we talk. We don't carry around the thesaurus in our back pocket. We say the raunchy stuff. We say the stuff that makes no sense sometimes. We misunderstand words and things like that. And we just bullshit. That's just the way that kids talk to each other. And I just think no matter how old the man gets, he is able to just capture exactly the way that kids talk to each other. And that's what makes his coming of age stories the absolute best. And I gotta say, coming of age is definitely one of the things that I love the most about Stephen King. And I think the thing is, that's always been my favorite subgenre ever since I read To Kill a Mockingbird. And I think Stephen King just kind of fine-toned it to where that was everything to me. You have a really, really great coming-of-age story. I'm going to give your book a try no matter what. But I think he does it in a way that where, again, I talked about his age, and it means like he's almost, 80 now? And I think the guy still remembers the way the kids talk to each other. He's able to nail those little things that we all went through in coming of age, because no matter how different we are, we don't all grow up in small town America. You didn't grow up in Maine. You didn't grow up, in poverty or in the suburbs or anything like that. He's still able to capture something that we all went through, and that is our coming of age moment. You remember what it's like growing up when you read a Stephen King story, and then when you read it again when you're older, you're transported back to that time period. And that's what makes this book just truly magical for me. Small town America, like I said, I feel like, oh, well, let's connect with everybody who's never really been there. And I'll talk to people on the other side of the world who've never even been to America and are like, yeah, I was transported to that small town America. And I feel like I know what life was like because of the way that he writes Americana. That is just something he's just the best at ever. And that transition, the very definition, coming of age, that transition from your childhood into being adult. With him, usually it's a very, very traumatic event. But I think it's one of those things where hopefully out there you've never had to escape giant 7-foot-tall monsters, and things like that with sharp teeth. But he writes it in a way that there can be kind of a symmetry to something that happened in your life, because he writes not only about the monsters, he writes about some of the things that humans do to one another. And I think that's something that is a big theme in his books. And we've all went through that. We all have family struggles. We all dealt with bullies. We've all dealt with all those little things in life that kind of form the person that we do become. And he tackles that with such a fierce, fierce realism that it's just no one else has ever been able to make it land the way that he does, because he just writes it in such a way that you're like, I know exactly what he's talking about right now. And that's just what makes him the ultimate storyteller. And I gotta say, if you've never read him, I feel like you're probably familiar with several of his stories, because he's a pop culture icon at this point. Because I think, for example, my mother, she wouldn't touch a Stephen King story with a 200-foot pole. But she knows what The Shining is. You could say, here's Johnny. She knows what she's talking about. You could talk about They All Float Down Here. She knows what you're talking about. So I'm saying there's several things that he's done where I feel like these stories have transcended everything. There's no person out there who hasn't heard at least of one of us saying, oh, hey, yeah, we're going to take that animal to the pet cemetery and it's going to come back evil. I feel like these are things that everyone knows about. You hear a mean dog down the street, what do people call it? They call it Cujo. So regardless if they've actually read these things or watched these movies or anything, they know these pop culture touchstones. And that's one of the things that just shows that he is embedded into the culture of America, and that we know these stories is because he's such an incredible, incredible storyteller. And that brings me to his writing style. One thing you'll hear a criticism of Stephen King is that they feel like, oh, well, he's not actually like really, really good prose. He's just kind of schlock. I disagree with this like crazy. I tell people all the time, read different seasons and tell me that the man can't write. It's just with his style of storytelling, he's not going to just, put out a bunch of purple prose just to make you be impressed because of what he can do. He has those talents. He just realizes his strengths lie elsewhere. But that doesn't mean he isn't a great writer. So I think, honestly, with the stories that he tells, he has a better prose he needs to have, because a lot of his stories are really told through the dialogue and the way that the characters interact with one another. That's really the crux of what makes his stories go. So I don't feel like his prose really has to be as good as it really is. And I mean, look, every book, he'll have those times where I'm like, oh, Stephen, because of the content he writes, that's just sometimes it's going to happen. When you're known as a horror writer, people expect you to shock them a little bit. So there are those moments still today with newest books where I'm like, oh gosh, he's going to do that once in a while. But again, that's one of those things like you've learned to love those things about Stephen. But he can flex his prose muscles with some of the best of them. Like I read this one passage from The Body one time for one of my reading introductions. My wife wasn't sure exactly what I was doing, but she heard that. She was like, holy crap, that's amazing. What is that? Because the man is an amazing, amazing writer. And you don't sell 400 million books because you're just okay. You're a really good storyteller. You're a really good writer. Obviously, these are the cases here. Multi-genre. This is something I think really here that is kind of dispel with some of the myths about Stephen King. He's just a horror writer, and I don't like scary books. I think if you're not reading Stephen King because you think he just writes horror, you're doing yourself a disservice. This guy has wrote a little bit of everything. Sure, he came to prominence and fame and stardom as the king of horror. That was something that really, really blew him up in the late 70s, early 80s. It really, really made him like the go-to. Then when he wrote something that wasn't horror, people were basically like, yo, stay in your lane, Stephen, before he finally broke out and said, I'm just going to do some of the things I want. The guy's wrote horror, of course. He's wrote sci-fi. He's wrote fantasy. He's wrote drama. He's wrote crime. He's wrote thriller, mystery. He's even wrote romance, for God's sakes. The guy has wrote a little bit of everything. And what I tell people all the time is I think he's actually wrote more stuff that isn't horror at this point than he has horror. So that was a label that, yeah, he grew to fame from that. And people will always associate him with all of his scary stories, I think. But again, the man's wrote over 70 stories here. I think it's okay to say he does a lot more than just horror. And I think he has a story out there for everyone. That's the best thing here, is when people ask me all the time, hey, where should I start with Stephen King? Well, it really just depends on what you're looking for. And I made that video on the channel twice now, because I feel like there's a different answer for that question, for no matter what you're into, because if you're looking for a long book, if you're looking for, like I said, you're looking for one of these different genres, if you're looking for a short book, you just want to be scared. Hey, you want a good relationship story. Hey, you want to know what it was like, remember what it was like growing up and stuff. He's got all these stories. He's got so many different genres for you to pick from. And sometimes, like with The Dark Tower, he just throws all in the blender and says, here you go. Here's a little bit of everything in one story. So again, if you've put off Stephen King for this long because you just feel like you don't like scary books, again, you're really, really doing yourself a disservice, because the guy has wrote in all the genres, all of them, sometimes, like I said, together. But let's talk about those monsters now. I think the monsters is why a lot of people do read Stephen King, because we want those memorable villains, right? He's got the legendary monsters. He's got Pennywise. He's got Cujo. He's got Christine. He's got Barlow. He's got some amazing, amazing villains. I think Leland Gaunt is just an amazing, amazing villain. But I think the theme of a lot of his stories, especially in the ones that have those big, giant supernatural monsters, is that humans are the real monsters. It's the hurt that humans do to each other that is the real crux of a story, that makes it where you're like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, I would be way more scared of Henry Bowers, than I would of Pennywise. And talking about, you got Henry Bowers is just one of the all-timers, because I think all of us at one point in our life were bullied by somebody. Hopefully they didn't try to carve their name into your chest. Jack Torrance, Annie Wilkes, Greg Stilson, Frank Dodd. He's got some amazing, amazing human villains in his story. And again, sometimes those leave a more lasting impression on you than the actual monsters do. Like, I mean, who doesn't still have nightmares about Annie Wilkes, right? If you've read Misery, you know. But in the end, I think while he will write this thing about why humans are the real monsters, something that is really great about his books is he does write about the human spirit and the good side of people. So I think it's really, he can be looked at as somewhat of a pessimist. And I don't think so, because I think this is where when you come up as a horror writer, people expect you always to have the big shocker or the sad or somber, ambiguous ending. But when he, at this point, he gets so much crap for his endings. Let's be honest here. He gets a lot of crap for, I think some of it's justified. Most of it is just wrong. It's not, it's incorrect. It is inaccurate. It's like, tell me you haven't read Stephen King without telling me you haven't read Stephen King if you just say he cannot write an ending, because he can. He can write an ending. It's just some of them, they really stick with you a lot, like, wow, it would have been an amazing 10 out of 10 if you could have just stuck the landing on that ending. I think it's going to happen anytime you're a horror author, because people, if you do a sad ending, they'll say, well, I need a little more hope in my life. I can't end a story like that. If he tries to write a happy ending, like, oh, it's just unrealistic Disney bull crap. If he writes an ambiguous ending, like, well, I need something other than that. I mean, it's just, no one's ever going to be happy with an ending. I think it's the hardest thing to land as an author is probably the ending, because you're never going to write one that pleases everybody, I don't think. I don't know. 11/22/63 is pretty impressive. But, that's something we could get into another time. But he has incredible tales of friendship, of found family, star-crossed lovers. The guy has amazing stories about the good in people. And I think that really gets thrown by the wayside. People don't really give him credit for that, about how much he writes about overcoming incredible odds, about what humans are actually capable of. He has so many themes of if we stick together, we can face down anything, otherworldly or not. We can do it if we just stick together. Think about like the quartet in the Dark Tower. Amazing story. And you think about these were all outsiders that didn't really have another person, someone they would call family. They all come together and they do amazing things. You think about the Losers Club. The Losers Club, all different walks of life. No reason whatsoever they should have been as strong as they were, but they stuck together and they did incredible things. And I think that's something that really just does not get talked about enough with Stephen King's stories, is that he has some incredible human character moments. So if you think his books are all just like sadist and just pessimistic and just awful nihilism, I think you haven't read Stephen King enough to know that he has incredible books about the human spirit and what makes humanity worth saving. In the end, guys, it's the multiverse. This is about the multiverse. Say you grew up on the MCU. You think everything needs to be connected now. Well, I have good news for you. Stephen was doing it before it was cool. Now, here's the thing. You don't have to read every book to understand what's going on. But if you do read them, you start to see those connections and realize, wow, these are all taking place in the same universe. And there's big connections. There's little connections. There's name drops. There's things that you'll get if you've only read previous books and things like that. But if you read The Dark Tower, you can put all kinds of things together. Now, The Dark Tower is really the connective tissue, as it were. If there was a heart of the multiverse, The Dark Tower is it. Everything kind of spreads out between them. Now, I used to tell people you need to read some of the multiverse before you read Dark Tower. Now, after a couple of years of doing this and doing a Dark Tower reread myself and talking with a lot of people who are reading The Dark Tower for the first time, and that's all the Stephen King they've read, I'm like, maybe it would make more sense to read Dark Tower first. Now, you got to read, there's a couple, I have a video about things you should read before you read Dark Tower, obviously, because I don't want to spoil other things for you. But now I start to think, okay, yeah, if I went back and read some of those things and I knew about, like when I read Insomnia, I read Insomnia for the first time before I read Dark Tower. And then I read Insomnia again after Dark Tower. I was like, holy crap, this makes so much more sense. There was so much of that book I didn't understand. And later on in his bibliography, like in the 90s, where he was really leaning into the Dark Tower, he started writing stuff in his books where you needed like the ending of Evil Things. You didn't read Dark Tower, you're probably like, I'm not sure what happened there. So I think these are things that it does enrich that story, and it makes the multiverse just so much better. So The Dark Tower is one of my top 5 favorite fantasy series of all time. Yeah, I have my detractions of it, and we've talked about those, and a lot of them are big falsehoods. They're not actually true. But yeah, I think if you do read The Dark Tower, it's going to enrich the multiverse even more and give you this great connective tissue to his whole bibliography, where you'll be like, oh my God, I remember this character from all the way back here. Hey, this character in Cujo pops up over here. Hey, this character in Evil Things, I remember them in Salem Slot. It's just so many things about like Castle Rock and Derry and all these small towns in Maine that all connect together. And it's just so satisfying when you do it that way. Some people just consider them Easter eggs, and they can be looked at that way. But again, if you read something like Dark Tower, it's going to make the whole multiverse just seem bigger and better. And guys, I recommend it at the highest level. So if I've got final thoughts on this issue here, look, no human on this planet has had their voice in my head longer than Stephen King. I've been a constant reader for over 30 years now, and I don't imagine that's going to change anytime soon. So I think that it's just an author that I cannot recommend enough, because for me, it's character first. You can have the greatest world. You can have the greatest writing style. You can have the fanciest little covers. Doesn't matter to me if I don't care about your characters. And almost 100% of the time, this guy nails his characters. And they are always so memorable. And it doesn't matter how big his cast is, you're going to fall in love with that cast. Or you're going to love to hate them. You're never going to feel indifferent about any of them, because he's just so amazing at it. So I'm on the I would read his grocery list level of fandom. Obviously, you don't have to convince someone like me to read Stephen King. The purpose of a video like this is to get new people to try Stephen King. So if you've been on this channel for a while, I've had so many people tell me I was never planning to read Stephen King until I watched some of your content, and I've convinced some of those people, and they would consider themselves constant readers now. That's obviously the goal here. I want more people to discover my favorite author of all time, and hopefully some of these points will get you to pick up a book or not. So if you don't know where to start, like I said, I put that video on the channel numerous times. You're still not sure? Hit me up. I would love to talk to you about Stephen King. There's nothing in this world I'd love to talk about more. So I think I can find the perfect Stephen King book. Just tell me what you're looking for. You're looking for a big book. You're looking for a small book. You're looking for a quick book. You're looking for a scary book. You're looking for a sweetheart book. I can tell you all these things about Stephen King. There's very few things out there where I can be like, you know what? I consider myself an encyclopedia on this. Am I an expert? I wouldn't say that, but I'm better than most. So I feel like if you want to know where to start with Stephen King, I'm the guy to talk to. And hopefully this video will convince you to go ahead and pick up Cy King because he's the best thing going today. So guys, have you read Stephen King? What's your favorite book? I'd love to know all these things. You want to know where to start? Hit me up. I got a Discord. I've got Twitter. I've got Instagram. Just ask, guys. I would love to help you out. So hit me in the comments, guys, and I will talk to you there.